Thank you guys for such a beautiful meditation and then just a wonderful, wonderful music coming out. The talk today is called Welcoming Fear, Meeting and Greeting Our Shadow Side. And in this speech I borrowed from two great articles. The first is What Happens to the Brain When We Feel Fear by Arash Davanbakht and Linda Saab. And the second one, which I pulled a lot from, was called Fear Not by meditation teacher Sally Kempton. Next slide, please. How appropriate to talk about fear as we're cruising into Memorial Day. I've been watching the series World War II in color, and they have footage of the men in the landing boats headed for the Normandy shores on D-Day. Could you imagine the fear that was coursing through those young men's bodies at the time? And for good reason. Many of those young men are dealing with the fact that this may be their last few minutes on earth. So I'm going to give you a tiny biology lesson. Let's talk about what's happening to these young men as they're being driven through the choppy waters to the shores of Normandy. Next. The fear reaction starts in the brain and it spreads through the body to prepare us to either fight or to run away. It starts in a region called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a tiny almond-shaped set of nuclei in the temporal lobe whose job it is to detect how great a fear is or a threat is to us. For the young men in the landing boat, with the sound of machine gun piercing the water next to them, the threat is very, very real. So the amygdala triggers the release of stress hormones and fires up the sympathetic nervous system. And that leads to a bunch of different chemicals coursing through our bodies that prepares us to fight or to run away. The brain becomes hyper alert. Our pupils dilate. The bronchi in the lungs dilate and breathing accelerates. The heart rate and blood pressure rise. Blood flow and a solid shot of glucose energy goes right to the skeletal muscles. And all of this happens so that those young men in the boat, the minute they hit the beach, are in optimal survival mode. So to put it succinctly, we are hardwired with fear circuitry. We have it built into our systems for our survival. And it's been there from the moment our ancestors climbed out of the primordial stew. It's certainly one of the most ancient parts of our makeup. So let's fast forward to now, to this very moment. You guys are probably sitting in an easy chair. You're sitting cross-legged, comfortably, somewhere on a cushion. We're all safe. None of us are facing the physical threats to our lives that those young men faced. Yet, I think it would be safe to say that in our lives, in this modern age, we all are dealing with fears on a regular basis. I also would think it's safe to say that much of the fear that we are encountering comes from our patterns of thinking. The fear that is created by anticipating a painful future or by dwelling on past painful events. This takes many forms. Maybe we're dealing with an illness that threatens us. Maybe we're dealing with a disaster like this virus. Maybe we're dealing with fear that comes from a high-stress job, a high-stress relationship, or conversely, the fear of having no job. If we're parents, we all understand the fear we have surrounding the well-being of our children. Maybe we've tied our fear or our sense of self-worth to a dream. So we fear going after it and possibly risking failure. Can you go back one slide? Maybe our fears are very, very common, like the fear of speaking in front of a crowd or something like that, like this poor dog right here. But no matter what the fear is that we experience it, whether it is physical or psychological, it is experienced in our bodies in the same way that those young soldiers experienced it. Our bodies get flooded by hormones as we prepare to fight or to run away. Too much of this and it becomes chronic, and it has negative effects on our system, which is what some of us may currently experience. So what are some divine ways we can work with fear? Next. This may sound counterintuitive, but the first thing that we can do is to welcome it. On any level that we're talking about, fear is simply here trying to protect us. It may be physical, like the adrenaline we get when we see a snake, or it may be psychological. It may be the ego's attempt to keep us from suffering. No matter what it is simply trying to protect us. So one way to welcome fear and to work through it is through meditation. And here's a little meditation practice you can do, and I took this from Sally Kempton's article. There's Sally Kempton right there. First, imagine greeting your fear and bowing to it. Ask the fear what it has to say to you, and then listen to the message. Tell the fear that you know it is trying to protect you, and that you appreciate this, but you would like it to give you a little space to back off. Then sit in meditation, allowing yourself to experience the spaciousness that this will create. To quote Miss Kempton, when you soften to fear and treat it kindly, as opposed to trying to run away from it or deny it or escape it, you make space for the fear to relax. At that point, you begin to realize that fear is not something concrete and solid, and that it too shall pass. And you can even start to see through it as it becomes more transparent. You can recognize it that is usually a natural reaction to the new or a habitual pattern of thinking, and let it go. When you welcome events that threaten your ego's sense of well-being, you affirm that the truth that you are is bigger than the events, and there is a wholeness to you that can withstand even the big-time ego busts that come in life, like sickness, loss, failure. Welcoming what comes, whatever it is a powerful way of loosening the grip of fear and anger. Another meditational practice for dealing with fear is to welcome and observe the fear. Imagine within yourself that you have two birds. The first bird is the part of us that is completely involved in our life, taking the highs, the lows, the middles, going for the crazy ride that we call life, tying it all up in a big old dramatic story that we call ourselves. If you were looking for a different term for that bird, you might call it the ego. The second bird that's in us is called the witness. And that's the bird that stands apart from everything and simply observes life. If you're looking for a different term for the second bird, you might call that your deeper self, your deeper consciousness. When we start to identify with the deeper self in meditation, we are entering what is called witness consciousness. To help you achieve this, you can use some questions when you're dealing with fear. You can say, what is it in me that observes this fear? You can ask yourself, who is it that is experiencing this fear? Or who am I beyond this fear? Or, where is the love in all of this? This allows you to begin to find a part of yourself that is unaffected by the fear. The part of you that can not only observe it, but you can see it as part of a play of consciousness in the moment. And in that way, fear becomes less powerful in our lives. Next. Another way to deal with fear is through affirmations. We practice affirmations here quite a bit in Unity. And we can practice right now. Imagine you're having a health crisis. Instead of dwelling on the negative aspects of it, you can say, I welcome this crisis because it's giving me a better opportunity to take care of myself. I welcome it because it reminds me that I'm human and vulnerable. I welcome it because when I welcome it, my heart opens and I learn more about myself. Again, quoting Miss Kempton, to welcome what is, instead of trying to push it away, triggers the natural goodness that is within our own being. There's an old saying, what you resist persists. But the opposite is true. What you let in eventually leaves. That release gives you the opportunity to discover the natural courage that is even deeper than fear. Lastly, next, let's realize the part that fear may play in our lives. All of us are divine beings having a human experience. It's wonderful that we got these human bodies. It's our good fortune. It's fun, it's cool, but we who are on the spiritual path have made a conscious choice to open more to the divine in our lives. Our fears are often the edges where we get stuck in relationship to spirit. It's the places where our egos are holding on to their small sense of self and their limited sense of control. Our fears, therefore, are the places where we have the most opportunity for growth and surrender. We're all on the journey. We're all walking together. And what are we walking towards? We're walking towards complete awareness of the divinity within ourselves. On a very cellular level, we are going to know that God exists within us as us. But until we are completely settled in that consciousness, we are going to be prodded, we're going to be pushed a little bit by Spirit to keep going, to keep growing. And one of the tools that He uses is fear. So thank you, fear. Thank you for trying to protect us. And thank you for showing us the areas we need to work on in the future. And getting back to the human side of things, last slide. Every story involving a hero has to do with that hero facing his or her fear. Whether he's a young man traveling rapidly on a Higgins boat to the shores of Normandy, or if that hero is a middle-aged mother sitting on a meditation blanket, quietly working through her anxiety about the future. We are all heroes, and we're all on the journey. Thank you very much.